Hi, this is Reg Athwal, and welcome back to our channel for our loyal followers. For those of you brand new, we have got episode 1 of a new show series, Family Business Advisors. For those of you watching a lot of our other episodes on the channel, you know we've got Family Business Experts, where I get a chance to interview experts, entrepreneurs from all over the world who give us their insights, ideas, and words of wisdom. But we wanted to do a little bit more than that and find other people who are also experts, authorities who advise clients, especially family businesses. And that's why we decided to create this new show. And I'm really, really happy that we've got a world authority today, Ken McCraken, all the way from Scotland. And let me give you a formal introduction. It's only fair for our first formal episode of the show series. Ken is an FFI fellow, is a family business consultant and advisor, and he's also the founder of MFBC Limited in Edinburgh, Scotland. Ken teaches a family business module on the STEP Professional Postgraduate Diploma in Private Wealth Advising. And in 2016, he was named the Family Business Advisor of the Year by the Society of Trusts and Estate Practitioners. He is a former member of the Research Applied Board for the Family Business Review and is a current member of the 2020-2021 UK-Europe Regional Advisory Committee for FFI and recently joined their board. I've got a few other things here with his background. Year 2000, he was involved in a family business consulting practice combined with his legal work and a law firm. 2013 was with Withers Worldwide, built another family business consulting practice there, and later on moved into KPMG, setting up a brand new practice for them, and eventually his own company a few years after that. So he's a real expert in succession, governance, education, many other areas. Very impressed with his publications, which you can see on the screen, and we're going to do a little deep dive into some of those today. So on that note, Ken, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much. Great to see you.
So let's get stuck in, shall we? You know, with both of us being authorities and advisors, working with clients, I think your book, I really enjoyed reading parts of your book when you talk about when you're advising family businesses, sometimes it's not just all about governance and we must do this and have this framework or work within this domain or this process. Sometimes there's other good things already happening in the family, isn't there? So I'd love for you to kick off with that. Why is this important and why should we throw away best practices sometimes?
Well, I think it's the benefit of experience. I think when I started doing this work with all the knowledge and ideas that were churning around in the early 90s, I did tend to say to families, look, this is how you ought to do it. And some of them bought into that, but a lot of them were saying, well, we've been successful and we like doing things the way we like doing them. And it really alerted me to the rich knowledge that there is in the experiences of successful family enterprises.
Yes.
And I also learned that family enterprises kind of like to change slowly and move forward by adapting what has worked for them. So I think in order to be effective in what I do, you have to start by meeting the clients where they are and understanding why they've been successful, how that has worked. Because sometimes it's so just natural for them, they're not really able to describe it. And then when working with people like me, they get to sort of understand it a bit better. The question is, well, can you adapt that to make it functional going forward? And you kind of develop the client's understanding of what they've got, their ideas about what might help them to go forward. And sometimes, they make very small incremental changes, but that's enough. And I just think it's a more respectful and ultimately, I think, effective way than me arriving in businesses. And over here where I work, I've got businesses 6th, 7th generation.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem plausible to me that I can turn up and say, this is how you ought to do it.
That's right.
Because they've been doing it for 200 years. So I think it's just a way of going about the work that I think is more respectful. I also think it's more realistic. And
yeah, I like that.
There's a great deal to learn from studying families that have been successful rather than saying you ought to do this or you ought to do that.
I think, Ken, when you've gone in with that approach over the years, What are some of the things you started to notice when you wear those lenses, looking for the things that have worked and they're not aware of? What are some of the things that have come from that?
Well, as a general statement, every family has a functional system of governance because they wouldn't be successful in the first place if they didn't have it. I think the elements of that, we could spend a lot of time on, Reg, but briefly, there'd be this system of norms, and you might call them values. I prefer norms because it defines what is normal for that family. They will have boundaries around the family, they will have boundaries around ownership, and then the interface between those domains and the business or businesses that they own. They'll have practices around economics of ownership, reinvestment, the uses and enjoyment of wealth, yes, how people become engaged in the business. So you just have to sort of take time to try and describe that. But you also notice that they have some ways of running businesses that other people might describe as idiosyncratic. So for example, a lot of them will work very well without boards. Now, you might say, well, that's straight, that's just wrong. Well, it can't be wrong, they are successful. And the reason that they work without boards is sometimes that as relatives, they don't kind of feel very comfortable meeting in the formal setting of a boardroom. And they feel much more comfortable giving responsibility for part of the business to a trusted relative. So somebody deals with manufacturing, somebody deals with sales, somebody else deals with finance, and they run it in silos. Now, I don't think you can say that's a dysfunctional form of governance because of the very fact it works. The question that the client might need help with is, can that continue working in the future? And if so, how so? And if it isn't going to work, what has to change to come up with a new form of governance that will enable them to go forward?
Does that depend, Ken, on that approach? Does that depend on the size of the family? Does it depend on what generation they could be? Is that relevant at all?
Well, I've not found that. I have tried to think that is the case. There must be some correlation between generational stage, balance sheet size, number of owners, whatever it is. But I think not, because some families come at the first generational interchange, and some are coming at the sixth or seventh generation. Yes, some are small business, some are large businesses. I just think that all of them, if they've been successful, are doing something right. And the job for an advisor is to meet them where they are, understand it, and then start to figure out, starting from that position, what is feasible, what is possible for this family going forward. So I can't see the correlations between.
For example, I remember once having a chance to interview a chairman of a 12th generation family business, and with 1,300 living members around the world, all connected to the original bloodline, obviously with all extended family members and so on, about 700 shareholders and 400 companies in the portfolio. And what he was sharing was, he said that around the fourth, fifth generation of their particular business, they had a lot of challenges. One was down to how many members they had, but there were two clear issues. One was they noticed more and more of the next generation did not want to be part of the business. Mm-hmm. So they were losing out on a lot of talent. But at the same time, there was a contradiction because they'd put structures in place where board seats and family members working within the legacy businesses was also limited. So there's a bit of contradiction there. And when they investigated why, they realized that it was all connected with spouses. As they went deeper, they realized because they had this hard rule that spouses could not be part of the business in any capacity, the spouse is not with bad intent, but passively was speaking to the next generation saying, don't be part of this. Yeah. Because really what they were saying was, I don't have a sense of belonging and I don't want you to go through what I've gone through. What's your thoughts around just giving that as an example? Because as a result of that, they needed good advice. They needed to change their model, but they didn't want to be in a position where if they carried on doing the same thing, it could have led to disaster come sixth generation?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, you draw attention, or you remind me, Reg, that I do think there is some sort of correlation going on between the level of complexity in a family business and the need for them to develop and move governance forward. But that complexity can arise at the first generation if there's 14 siblings.
That's right.
Or it could arrive at the 10th generation, depending on the demographics of the family and the scale of the business. So I think, but as both of those tend towards becoming more complex, then the need for governance to upgrade to cope with that complexity, I do think, is a kind of natural, organic, evolutionary process.
Yeah.
To your point about spouses, my approach to this, Reg, is to say to clients, here are 5 good reasons to involve and include spouses in the roles of maybe ownership or employment in the business. And on the other side of the page, there's 5 good reasons why you wouldn't do it. Now, as a family, where does the family feel comfortable? Because for some families, they very much include the spouses as part of the family, but it stops at ownership. But you can come in as an employee. Others, it's as they embrace them completely, you become part of our family. Others say, stay back, not to be trusted. Yes. Now, I think each of those has pros and cons and consequences, what you've drawn attention to. If you exclude spouses, you're actually excluding the parents of the next generation, and you've got to anticipate that that might filter its way down to the next generation because of that sense of not being included. So that's a risk. But none of the choices that families have can be completely risk-free. I think what they need to do is see both sides of the argument. I sometimes call myself a reporter of sides. I'm not in either side of any argument. I just want you to know that there's good arguments on both sides and look at them and then be true to yourself. Because I don't think a family business can really work if there's a real sense that we've done something that just goes against our grain, our culture, our values, our beliefs. And then, but in making those choices with an open heart and an open mind, you realize that there are certain risks and maybe you can manage some of those. So exclude spouses from ownership, inclusion and employment and family governance. Is that sort of making a balance out of a difficult topic? And the same goes for other things like working and non-working owners. Should we have trusts or not have trusts? There's good, strong arguments on both sides of that. I think families just need some help sometimes to walk around the total of those and then make a well-informed choice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where we definitely have something in common where between both, our firms, I know between us, we've worked with more than 200 families, across the world. And I think when you've done that and got that practical experience, you can share case studies without breaking any confidentiality and at least open up their minds. I think creating awareness is important, isn't it? You've got to be able to drop in ideas. You've got to open up their brain to the possibilities in order to then navigate and guide where then they can go, you know what, that's something we like. We'd like to build off that. Or oh, that would never work for us.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I do think we're very much on the same page there, because my job, as I see it, is to provide information and ideas that the clients won't have, and then to help them think, to understand, and then think their way through it, because it's a very emotional time, and emotions can overwhelm our capacity to think. That's what emotions can do. The fight or flight mechanism comes in, and then people stop thinking. So our job is to provide information and ideas, help them understand what's going on, help them make better decisions. And in doing and providing that help, be independent. And I think families sometimes, or any of the ones I work with, say that's really helpful. Everyone else has got a vested interest. It's just helpful maybe to have somebody who's independent of any of those to help us as a family think through and make our choices.
Yeah, that's good. So Ken, maybe we can also educate, viewers who could be watching this. Maybe they're just getting into the industry as a consultant, as an advisor. Some people may have heard of FFI, which you're associated with, Family Firm Institute, a large organization, I believe. There's a couple of thousand members, I believe, in about 80 countries around the world. But not all of them make it, do they? They're not all successful, even though they've got their badges and certifications. So let's call a spade and be direct here, Ken. You know, what makes a great advisor? What makes a great consultant? And if we look at the other side, why do so many of them fail? You know, we know there's a lot of people come into this industry. They haven't been doing this like you and I for 20 years, and they do this for a couple of years and they're out. What happened?
Oh, my. What you make me think of in response to that is, I think what helps an advisor who's working with family businesses is to be knowledgeable enough to understand the whole range of issues, the system-wide issues, as we call them, that are going on in families. Now, that requires investment in knowledge and training and development and practice, like any set of professional skills. But it's that broad understanding of all the forces that are at play, as well as being able to manage whatever particular subject matter you have. Mine is governance. Some people might be mentoring or coaching or, I don't know, psychological, therapeutic type interventions, but being able to understand the system-wide dynamics that are always at play means that you are a much more efficient and effective guide and navigator. Now, coming from the legal background, my sense of it is that in that profession and others that I feel I reasonably know over the years I've been in the professions, the dominant paradigm is specialism. And that tends to mean that you know an awful lot about some aspect of something.
Yes.
And specialisms often get narrower and narrower, deeper and deeper, however you want to describe it. And I was talking to somebody about this, in fact, yesterday, and it was them that said this, so I was just kind of reporting their take on it. And they said, it's as though the advisor, the specialist, is looking at the bottom left-hand corner of the painting. And it's, you know, really doing something fantastic down at that left-hand corner, but meantime, the rest is not being looked at and not understood. And I think to be a really good advisor for family businesses, kind of have to buy into the reality, and as to get his reality, that the clients' lives are complex and interrelated, and there's lots of things interacting all the time. And therefore, any intervention that you make will have those kind of consequences. Now, to do your job well, you have to kind of get your head around that and be able to then do whatever it is you do and cope with that reality. If that's too tough to, I don't know, maybe tough's not the right word, but if that's not your thing, and you feel more comfortable being in the bottom left-hand corner of the painting doing the specialist treatment in that corner, fine. But that's different. So I think, but the challenge, I think, Reg, is that because the specialist paradigm becomes so dominant in the professions, this broad systems-wide approach is kind of challenging that paradigm, and is challenging the business model of advisory firms that are modeled on that way of advising, and the advisors that are incentivized and rewarded to do it that way. So it is a bit of a mountain to climb. But look, on the other side of that, you just meet fascinating people who give you the privilege and opportunity to work with them on some real interesting challenges and very human challenges. And if you can provide them with some help, that's very rewarding. So I do my best as much as I can to encourage people from various professional backgrounds to come on in, get started, and just stay the course.
So can I ask you, Ken, then, so when you started with a legal background and integrated into the family business industry, we've come from a dominant human capital background and then integrated into family business, but we're very clear that if somebody wants legal advice, we're going to go to someone who understands that. We may be able to coach or mentor people or even counsel people at a base level, but if we're going to get into deep therapy, we're not touching that. We're going to go to an expert in that area. The same may be to do with trusts or other shareholder agreements maybe, or other types of areas. So one of the things I know you wrote in one of your articles was this difference between being a specialist and a generalist. But really, it's not about being a specialist or generalist. It's about building your ecosystem with trusted team, as you refer to. And I think in one of your articles, there was a case study around, was it Tom Wilson, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and you talked about having the different elements of a team. It doesn't all have to be in-house, but you've built your team. You've got your trusted team who can look after those other areas. What could you expand on that? Why is this important rather than trying to go in there and believe that you can do it all?
Well, I think going in there believing you can do it all is just a dangerous approach, that, because I'm not sure I've come across anyone so knowledgeable and so omnipotent that they could actually do it all. So I think all of us owe a duty to our clients to be very sure about where our expertise lies and the extent of that. And that moves into, as you just said, Reg, that then we need to know other people with the skills that may be needed. So I might meet a client and you're thinking, yes, there is a governance issue here, but have you noticed that your company's about to go bust? So you really, you might need some governance, but right now you do need some help with refinancing.
Where's the priority?
Or I take on some work and you think I'm doing well, and then suddenly you think there is real deep-seated behavioural issues here right out beyond what I can cope with. I think I need to introduce them to a therapist that can help them. Now, I think those networks, ideally they will be people from the different professions of origin, human capital, law, finance, accounting, financial planning, investment, therapy, whatever it is, who have become knowledgeable at family systems, that we all at least understand the reality of what we're dealing with. So that would be helpful, and that's where the FFI courses, the STEP courses, are helping people from those professions to get that knowledge. So it's very accessible. So it'd be really useful if we could all just create those networks of informed advisors. But I do think we all talk about multidisciplinary collaboration. I've not yet come across anywhere, I've only got my own experience, where it's worked really well. And this writing I've been doing about trusted teams is to say, well, how do you form a team? And look at how teams operate in different areas. High-performing sports teams are a team that does surgery, or a team that's an orchestra. And then you say, well, how do those teams work? Are we willing to, as advisors, each with our own specialism and each with our own area of specialist interest, to put it more accurately, are we willing to really subsume our self-interest into that team? So am I willing, for example, to share information with other team members? Without question. So I'm not protecting my interest by protecting information. Am I willing to share fees? If a team does well, the team gets rewarded. And if the team does bad, the team suffers. But you have teams of advisors, everyone's got their own bilateral agreement and is interested in their own financial reward from working with that client. There is no collective responsibility, therefore there's no collective will. There's no collective purpose, and therefore you're not really operating as a team, are you? You've got a lot of bilateral relationships that happen to be coalescing in a particular moment in time. But I think we've got a lot.
I think you've either got that approach, Ken, or again you don't build your ecosystem and team, and you just focus on the one thing that you're good at and make it very clear to the client, this is all I'm going to do. And if you need the other things, go out and find somebody. Yeah, I can refer you to someone. However, it's your call whether you want to go with it, however that agreement's going to work. Because sometimes, we have a contradiction. On one side, we're talking about being a trusted advisor, but at the same time, we may not have been trusting other people in our industry to come and help our client.
That's a perfectly reasonable position to take. I'm more inclined, however, to, if people ask me, can you recommend a good headhunter that is experienced working with family businesses? I'd like to think I could give them an answer. If the client does ask for particular specialist help in some domain, but they want it to be somebody that's savvy around the world of family business and in a particular part of the world, I would do my best to try and find them someone. And to the advisors, since this new format, Reg, that you've created, There's a fantastic opportunity for all the professions in relation to what I would think is the largest unrecognised sector for professional services. Everybody works for family businesses. You can't not do it if you're in the advisory space, because there's so many of them. So we all, yeah, you all work for them, but there's nobody really stretching and differentiating themselves from the massive firms that do whatever specialisms around law or accounting or whatever it is. So the firm that can step out with a group of advisors skilled in the latest thinking around the family business field, allied to their specialist expertise in whatever it is they do, would have a fantastic opportunity, I think,
yes,
to get significant market share. And that's a big statement, because the market of family businesses is huge.
Yeah. What about, Ken, yeah, thanks for the response to those questions. What about skills? So, for example, regardless of our expertise now, whether it's coming in from a legal perspective, accounting, wealth management, human capital, executive search, headhunting, whatever it may be, but if we're working with families at board level, with the owner, with the senior family members, and let's say we're not talking 2 members, we are talking 5, 6, 7 members plus in a room, there is specific skills that you need to be able to handle those conversations. So maybe we could touch on a little bit about the skills. So from where you started 20 years ago to now, and I can give some input with my experience as well, is what are some of the key skills we've had to develop to be at the top of our game? And if we had not developed those skills, we may have the theory and the experience, and yes, we've got some case studies, but we would have eventually reached a stage where we wouldn't have continued or not been referred to more clients, because our existing clients were not fully satisfied. Maybe you could give us your thoughts on your journey of upskilling yourself and in what areas.
I suppose it depends where you start from, because if you come from a professional background, you've already been imbued with the skills and mindsets of that profession. So mine was the law. So where did I have to really up my game? Well, yeah, understanding family systems, that was this lack of knowledge. So that's easily fixed now, because that stuff's out there. I think learning how to facilitate, not be the expert in the room telling people what the answer is. Learning how to read emotions in my case, so that I could understand what the heck was going on with those 7 people, and also stay in control of my own emotional reactions to those things, so that I was getting a skill to manage the situation and myself that went beyond just whatever I happened to be imbued with because of my upbringing. I think the attribute rather than a skill, I suppose, that I would say pushed me to do that, was just curiosity. I found this utterly fascinating. And it wasn't so, as you went along and you suddenly realized, good grief, this is fascinating. I need to learn this, because I'm exposing myself to these situations with the intention of being genuinely helpful. But I'm no use to anyone if I can't cope. And therefore, those the emotional skills that I've touched on, some people denigrate them as soft stuff, utter rubbish. It's really difficult stuff, so that you can be useful to your clients and look after yourself. Now, if you came with that from a professional background where that's been significantly part of your training, then your knowledge might have to be, well, you better understand the fiscal and legal structures that these clients exist in, because you're not going to get very far helping them if you ignore that, because it will have an immense impact on what is feasible. So all of us have that kind of, we need to decide where our skills are solid enough to rely on, and then open up your mind to learning and then developing new skills that will enable you to be effective when you're dealing with emotional assistance.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And then maybe for me, that's like the inner circle conversation. And on the outer circle, if someone's running a practice and they're a self-employed consultant, they don't have a team of people, then there's other skills they also need to develop to be sustainable for this practice to continue. And It's not just about someone's going to call you up and suddenly you've got yourself a client.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other skills required in running a business. I remember speaking to a client many years ago. Someone was referred to, and he said, "Reg, I really like your background and what you've done as an entrepreneur, because I want to work with someone who understands entrepreneurship and has that credibility. I don't want to work with someone who's just been reading a few books. I need to be able to communicate with someone at that level." And I think some people who, I'm not talking entrepreneurs building a big business, but even when you're self-employed or solopreneur, there's key skills and things you've got to learn of building that practice and that business, even though it's a small one-man band, to then be able to talk the right language when you're in front of an owner. Do you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts around the outer circle part that you've got to work on?
Yeah, no, I think that can help you relate and understand the challenges that the clients maybe are going through. Because I was self-employed, I was managing partner of a law firm, so I had to sort of get used to the ups and downs of how to do that. So I did sometimes feel a degree of empathy with the challenges of the business, actually just running a business, how difficult that can be. I think people who come from a family business background can bring that knowledge, because they've experienced some of this. I've worked with people in the field who've run businesses, inherited businesses, had those discussions between siblings and with parents that they're now helping other people with. So I think all of that can be really helpful, but we need to weave it together very carefully into a solid body of knowledge and professionalism. So for example, if you've come from a family business background or a business background, that helps, but you cannot use that as a lens through which you analyze someone else's family. Just because I had a discussion with my father and it went badly doesn't mean the discussion in that family between father and son will go badly. So I need to sort of use the benefit of those experiences to enrich what you can do, but don't use them as a lens through which you then interpret what's going on in a particular client. Because they come from a different culture, background, experiences. So does that make sense? I think it's like...
Yeah, completely. I think that balance of that professional background combined with whether it's FFI or your STEP program where you were the author, or like we've got the Family Business Academy with a couple of programs, I think getting that training is really important, but also learning the practitioner skills, how to be the real catalyst, the guide. How do you do that? How do you communicate? And we've had people over the years we've recruited, no longer with us. Our best partners are the ones who had family business backgrounds. They've been part of a family business, like you've just said. But the ones who couldn't build the soft skills and deal with what's the word I'm looking for? Ken, this could be draining sometimes when you're working with families, especially when there's conflict and a lot of issues, and you're speaking to each one by one, and they're confiding in you and they're trusting you and they're telling you about how they feel. You've got to take that on board. So how do you remain neutral, shed all that off before you go home and go, right, let me breathe and then grab my energy back, be grounded so I can go in again tomorrow morning? And there's a lot of people who can't handle those situations.
Yeah, and I think the what that brings to mind, Reg, is what I buy into to try and help manage that. Okay, you can have other people to support you, but I use a very sort of robust process, and it's not. I'm not fanatical about it, but it does help me go through the work with the client in a very methodical, predictable way, to be fully present when I'm with them and give all my energy to do that. But when I'm finished, I can put it back. But I know where I am in the process. I think sometimes when I was doing this work at the beginning, I didn't have that. I was almost like having to hold it all in my head, and it was this overwhelming amount of information. And so having, for me, a consulting process that you trust to deliver, it enables me to turn up, ready to do what I need to do it well, be fully present with that client, and afterwards say, that's it, for another, whatever it is, 5 weeks.
I like that. Ken, what are the things you've witnessed that have not worked, which is enabled you to become more of an expert, more of an authority, even a better advisor? You know, we all make mistakes. There's always things that don't work out. So what are some of the things that you've tried over the years and then quickly recognize, no, that's not a path I want to go down. That's a process that doesn't work.
Well, two things spring to mind, both based on my personal experience. And it picks up threads of our conversation, as you'd expect at this stage, I think, Reg, in having a chat like this. The first is, when you meet a client, you have to do your due diligence. You have to kind of tune into their wavelength and try to understand the way that they do things and what might be acceptable or not acceptable based on past experiences. So I didn't do that sometimes at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And therefore I missed information that turned out to be very important. So for example, I didn't know that one of the people in one of the families I was working with was adopted. And it made all the difference in the world. Mm. So the fault was mine. No, you could say they could have told me, well, why would they, unless I made inquiries as to the status of all the people that I was working with. So I think be very, very thorough about understanding. And the other case was where there had been a share buyback in a family historically that had gone badly wrong. It was the way the family remembered it in the story, the kind of narrative in this family was it was a disaster. So how well did it go down when I suggested there should be a share buyback? Well, again, I hadn't done my homework to find out that they'd done one in the past that they thought was a disaster. So I do think that we need to, when we first meet families, you need to do your due diligence to pick up all those clues. Absolutely. Based on past events and how those were understood by the key players, so that you can understand how they might perceive whatever it is you're going to recommend going forward.
Yeah. That's good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also the thing is that it's very hard. It's really hard. It's been in our conversation. Mm. I'm not there to judge my clients. I'm not there to be, I'm there to help. Mm. As long as I feel there are people of integrity that operate businesses in the proper manner, I don't have to, praise or condemn the way they do things. What I need to do is understand why they do it that way and figure out with their help if that's functional going forward. And it's very noticeable. I feel as a lawyer, I was very, very quick to judge as being things were good or bad. Generally, the client had done it badly, and whatever I thought was what they should have done was the good bit. But I just suspend all judgment. You're not there to judge them. You're there to help them.
That's right. Well, we go through a process called a D3. We call it a deep dive discovery. So that's a bit like the due diligence process. But I think one of my favorite questions would be, look, if we do speak to every one of your employees, every family member, everyone in the community, everyone that you know, every touch point, what sort of things will we find out? And let's save a bit of time. What do we need to know that you don't really want to tell us right now, but we're going to find out anyway in 4 weeks' time or 6 months' time? What would that be? And it's just shocking what comes out when you ask that type of question. Save a bit of time, which is, by the way, this is happening with such and such's daughter right now. Oh, this is what's happening with such and such, and this happened 5 years ago. There are some people who know about it, but it's a huge concern in the family right now. And it's good that we know that from the beginning so we can navigate the right way rather than having conversations where there's going to be a volcanic eruption anyway in 3 months' time.
I ask things like, is there anything that's happened in the past that you wouldn't want to repeat in the future? Is there anything that's gone well in the past that you think might be helpful in the future? Is there anything happening with individual family members that could have a material effect in the work? Is there anything outside in the world, for example, a bank, whose interest could be very material in coming up with what's viable? So I try to sort of get all that data so that, the clients might not tell you, but that's their prerogative. But not asking is my responsibility. So I've learned from that, and it's just now embedded as that's where the work needs to start. I do feel that sometimes when I was teaching advisors say, well, we couldn't ask that. I don't think I've ever had a client thought it was rude or out of line for me to ask.
I think it depends on how it's said, and maybe the relationship that you've built with them prior to engagement.
There's a bit of that. I often don't know clients much before we start doing the work. They come in to talk to me, and then we start doing the work. I do place faith that they are trusting my competence. If I walk into my doctor's, we don't sit down and have a chat and a coffee and get to know each other and talk about families. I'm there to get his help. I trust that he will do that well. And if he asks questions, I think, why is he asking that? Well, I'll answer it because I assume he's got a reason to ask me. And if I choose not to tell him, then okay, that might affect the advice he can give me. So I kind of take that approach. I'm asking these questions not to be nosy. I'm asking for a reason. And if clients want to help me, they will answer them. If they feel reserved, then they don't have to answer them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, moving on to one of your other articles, which I really enjoyed reading, you talked about transitions and triggers. Yeah. Certain events that trigger whether a family should work on their governance or succession plan or structure or whatever it may be. Could you tell us about, what are some of the typical triggers that leads into doing something about your position and working on some of the things that we both do?
Well, first of all, triggers are going off all the time. Things are happening all the time inside a family and inside their business. And there are things happening all the time in the external environment that they're having to cope with. Now, what's interesting is, what is the trigger event that makes them sit up and say, hang on, we need to do some work here? So they might have coped with any number of things which were just absorbed, they just adapted, they just ignored, and they just got on with running their business and got on with their family. And then something moves them into a kind of, we need to be active about this. So I think it's kind of interesting, I would say it's kind of important to know what is it that has triggered that desire for action, because that trigger is pointing towards the particular anxiety that has motivated the client to come and talk to you.
Yes, right.
Because if they want to talk about that, then you kind of need to know that's what the conversation needs to be about. If you ignore that, then sometimes they'll be so anxious about the trigger, whatever you're talking about is just bouncing off them, because their mind is totally focused on the reason that we need to talk to you about this is I fell out with my sibling at the weekend. And it's been the trigger that's now made the fact that our working relationship is dysfunctional. I think he's been defrauding the business and the bank are coming down on our heads because we're breaching our covenants. Now, I think so it's necessary to try and figure out why did they come to you and why now? And to do that, the triggers often are internal. They're around family events. Biology is a massive trigger, aging, illness, weddings, divorces, all that kind of stuff. Triggers in the business. The chief executive has just retired, and a client called me yesterday saying, well, the chief executive and non-executive chairman are now both retired. We need to do something. So we've now got a board succession issue, but that's the trigger for a whole reappraisal of the governance in their entire enterprise. So there's those internal triggers, often based on the events that are going on inside, and then there's external triggers. A change in tax laws might be the trigger. The health pandemic might be the trigger. Wars and social upheaval could be the trigger. I just think we need to know where we start from to be able to then navigate the journey where we meet the client where they are and the trigger is where they are.
Yeah.
And then we start.
What percentage, Ken, of all the clients you've worked with, when it comes to that trigger, are at a stage of or a state of surgery versus, we don't need to do any of this right now, but I think it's a good time because we're thinking about the future 20, 30, 40 years. We've seen other families split, exit, legacies come to an end. We don't want that. But we've got unity, we've got harmony. Yeah, let's work with Ken, let's work with Reg, and let's work on these things now, versus calling us up and expecting us to give them magic dust, get our, and sort all their issues out when really they've got to a point where they need surgery.
Well, I tend to assume that people are there because they're anxious about something. I think if people are finding life's going well and they're perfectly happy, family are doing well, everyone's healthy, growing up well, business doing fine, those moments are transient, so enjoy them. I'm not going to go around poking people with a stick saying, well, you should be thinking about this. If you think it's okay now, it's going to be miserable in the future. I don't think that's very helpful. So when they come, they are definitely anxious about something. So, because that is the motivation to act. That stress that's built up, that worry that's up, so we're not sure that this is going to work. And I trying to illustrate this, I gave the example is, I met a guy in his 40s, successful business, family was doing fine, and he was saying, we need to do this work. And I thought that's just one of these unusual people who, that you've just described, Reg, is maybe foreseeing events and anticipating this and doing the work when it's all calm and all that good stuff that we'd all encourage our clients to do. I just thought this is quite weird because I hadn't come across that many people. So I sort of asked, and we went back the way that his father and grandfather had both died prematurely.
Oh.
So this was him dealing with the intimation of mortality and the worry that he had, that how things, no matter how things were going at the moment, maybe they had a medical weakness, and he didn't want to leave his kids in the position that he had been left in when his father died unexpectedly. So the trigger was the portent of something that was deeply meaningful to him, but it was in their history. It wasn't happening now, it happened 2 generations and 1 generation ago. And with that information, you said, oh, right, I now understand. And I now know what you're worried about, so we can craft the conversation with that in mind so that your worry about this can be addressed. And now that you're saying this is the opportunity to look at all the other stuff.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take that opportunity and we'll spread this conversation out to deal with the bigger picture, which in that case is quite big. But I do think people tend to be motivated to act because they're anxious about something. The trigger is the kind of thing that's telling them, that's triggering that anxiety reaction.
Yeah, you're right. It reminds me, Ken, of a father who called me up once, and he said, Reg, I've heard about you and your firm through somebody else. I'd like to talk. Cutting a long story short, what was the trigger? He said, I've had a heart condition, and I'm concerned about the future. I said, why? And he said, well, I've got 2 children. One's got married, no longer part of our family, he's out of the family. Is an Indian family, so culturally the girl has left the family, and he goes, I've got 1 son and he's an idiot. And I've got this heart condition. So if something happens to me next week, next month, this is all over. so that was the trigger. It was a combination of health, but also, wow, how are we going to upskill, upgrade the next generation, one of them who's going to be the future successor. So it's a combination of family, personal anxiety, as you mentioned, an issue, but also, will this business continue, for the future? Or will people control my son and jeopardize everything because he's so naive and he has no clue of what to do? So that just popped in my head as an example of a trigger.
Yeah, and I think, the knowledge background to this, just kind of briefly, is understanding systems. Systems tend to want to stay the way they are. They protect themselves against change. If it's working, the kind of way the system works, like our body works, it wants to preserve the integrity of our physiology, our biology against potentially lethal changes. So if your blood pressure goes up, your body does something about it to try and bring it back down. So systems like family business systems kind of want to stay the way they are. So if a trigger has been enough for a family to become anxious enough to contemplate the possibility that that's not going to be possible, that's a big issue. So what is it that has, or is there a multiplicity of things? Because people might say, well, I just went to this course and it was really interesting. I thought we really should do something. Okay, that's interesting. So what was it in the course that really got your attention? Well, it was over remuneration. Okay, what was it over remuneration that got your attention? And you work your way back to say, okay, you've got a low level of discord going on about who gets paid what around here, and you're anticipating it could blow up, and you've told me that in a previous generation it blew the family apart. Right, so remuneration is a big part of this work, isn't it? Okay, now is this a remuneration intervention, or is that the opening to have a discussion around getting jobs in the business, reward, ownership, and all the other bits and pieces that are interconnected to that issue? So that's why it's interesting to share your thoughts.
Can I ask you, Ken? With all the years we've been doing this, amount of times I meet people who say to me, "Oh wow, we've never come across a firm that does that. That's really unique." Do you get that, or is there a lot more people as family business advisors, consultants in UK, in Scotland, in Europe, the Western world, compared to maybe Africa, Middle East, South Asia region? I mean, do you get that as well? This is quite a unique profession. It's a niche.
Yes, in the coaching profession, that is the case. I think it's an interesting topic of discussion. But I think in my life, it's gone from, well, this is how it feels anyway. So obviously I'm an advocate, I'm a fan, I'm an enthusiast, I'm a zealot. I'm not level-headed about this type of thing at all. I love it. So, but my perception of it is when I started, it was just for the reaction of advisors since we're in that domain. It's a bit weird. Anyway, we don't have to think about that. And now I feel other advisors are saying, we get it. We acknowledge that this is different and we see how it can be helpful. So we kind of now want to include it within the range of networks that we as an advisory firm want to be able to say to our clients, if you need this help, we can go and get somebody, because it is a different expertise. I think what is also motivating that recognition of this as a niche, a distinct profession, is the work is risky.
Yeah.
And as advisors try to think, well, we can do this, and they go and try it, they go, we don't do this. That is difficult work, and we don't want to place ourselves in the position that the client might say, you weren't qualified to do this. So their aversion to risk, or their managing of risk, is they're going to kind of pull back. But the other thing is the customers, the families are really well educated about this. So in a sense, this change has been consumer led. It's the clients that are saying, we want this advice. So people are saying, okay, now it's like legitimate because the customer's asking for it. So I think all of those forces have moved us on pretty significantly from when I started in the mid-90s, which is like you were just some sort of wacko that was doing something really strange. So now I think we have established that I do think we have a profession.
Yeah, it's good. So maybe with the time we've got left before we wrap up, I think we're going to have multiple episodes to this new show series together and with other people in our industry. What's the pulse of 2020 pandemic? What's the pulse in your part of the world with family businesses right now and the challenges that they're facing?
Well, I think there's some families for whom the pandemic is an existential threat to the model of their business. That's well documented, and families are not immune to that. Hospitality, retail, high street retail, these are difficult places to be. And families are having to face into that reality. And those that have a multi-generational investment horizon are really having to think, are we in the right sector? Are we invested in the right assets in order to be able to maintain this, pass it on to a family? Families tend to grow demographically. If you're in a sector that's shrinking because of the effect of the pandemic, that's a difficult equation. So that is, really exercising families, good on them, they're facing into it. And they're having to decide, do we maintain our commitment to a sector and accept the economic pain? Or do we have to redeploy our assets in pursuit of other economic gains in order to look after our family? And that's really got some families to pay a lot of attention to. Well, why do we want to be in business together as a family? I think there's a lot of next gen stuff. Everyone talks about next gen. Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. I really do buy into that. I think my own interest is something that I'm trying to encourage others to pay more attention to, is the needs of the senior generation. We have a generation of people who will live longer than at any time in history. There's no social memory. There are no skills and experience to draw on to help us cope with that. And that means that they're venturing into something that their successors will also hopefully enjoy if they live a long and happy life. But for the first time in human history, we have people who might live well over 100 years. So how do we, and they're the ones that are with control, they're the ones that have ownership and leadership of these great businesses. And until they feel that they can do something meaningful with their lives, you've got to kind of think, well, they might not want to let go. So I do think that I'd like there to be a time soon, because this is a pressing issue, where every next gen course that you hear about is matched with a senior gen course that is looking at the challenges of aging and the consequences that has on transitions. And therefore the transition model that we use of one generation to the next, that's actually not what's happening. There's 3 generations. Those who are now living longer than any time in history, their kids who are at least are in midlife, still thinking, will it ever happen? And their kids who are saying, it's never going to happen, so why would I even want to be bothered about it? So that change of demographic is enormously influential, and I think that's something that we need to really get our heads into, is much more than is happening.
Yeah, that's good. I think we shall conclude there,
Okay.
Ken, and to be continued. If you were to leave one last piece of wisdom, idea, thought for the viewers, if someone's looking to get into the family business advisory space, is it worth it? Is it worth doing, or go and do something else?
No, I think it is worth doing. Of course, I'm going to say that. I think to test yourself working with complex family groups, with complex enterprises, is fascinating. It's an absolute privilege and a delight. But because of that, if I had to say something, and this is to the advisors, is go and get the knowledge. It's out there. It's now more accessible than it's ever been. So the pathway into this world is much more a superhighway than it was when you and I probably started, where you were going all over the world getting bits and pieces from various people. Now it's there, and I really do hope that this profession that we're part of will just continue to grow, and more advisors will enjoy doing what you and I do, Reg.
Yeah, fantastic. And there's only 5 million family businesses in the UK, so there's space for all of us.
Plenty space. Plenty space.
Well, thank you very much. For those of you watching all the way through to the end, don't forget to go down to the description area where you'll find more details on Ken's company and the links to connect with him. Hit the like button, helps the algorithm to reach more people. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and also watch some of the other show themes that we've got on the channel. And Ken, thank you very much again. Look forward to doing this again with you soon. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Reg. Thanks very much.